Here's the secret science behind Batman's Batarangs. Welcome to Behind the Fandom, the show where we separate science from fiction and put the fan back in fantasy. I am vengeance. I am the night. I'm Maud Garrett. Hi. But have you seen Batman and I in the same room? Today, we are looking at one of the most iconic weapons in comic book and video game history, Batman's Batarangs. Today's episode is brought to you by The Real Cost. Just like you wouldn't walk down a place literally named Crime Alley in the middle of the night while wearing your finest pearls, you wouldn't put toxic metals inside your body. And that's exactly what could be happening if you vape. So protect your health like you would protect your pearls, and remember the real cost of vapes. When molded into the right shape, like, let's say a bat signal, metals can do amazing things, like stopping crime dead in its tracks. Metaphorically speaking, of course, we all know that Batman doesn't kill, even though he probably could with these metallic masterpieces. Created by writer Gardner Fox, the Batarang first appeared in Detective Comics 31 in September 1939 as part of the story Batman vs. the Vampire Part 1. Modelled after what they call the Australian Bushman's boomerang, which should really be called the Australian Indigenous people's boomerang, the weapon actually missed its intended target, the villainous monk, on an inaugural mission, but it did help Batman lower a chandelier to escape a pit of snakes later in the same story. You win some, you lose some, I guess. A portmanteau of bat and boomerang, Batarangs are a staple of Batman's arsenal, offering the Dark Knight a non-lethal way to take down his enemies, and is probably responsible for more reconstructive hand surgery among Gotham's criminal underworld than anything else, given how frequently they take one of these bad boys to the hand while wielding a gun. Over the years, the Batarang has evolved constantly, with various modifications to suit Batman's ever-changing needs. There's a flashbulb Batarang designed to illuminate dark places, a seeing eye Batarang with a camera attached for surveillance purposes, and even the massive Batarang X, which Batman used to glide over a crime scene like a massive hang glider. More modern interpretations of the Batarang are based on shurikens, aka throwing stars, rather than boomerangs, but their purpose largely remains the same: to help Batman style on would-be criminals and act as an undeniable calling card of sorts. But are Batarangs practical weapons? Aren't boomerangs supposed to return when thrown? And just how much of Bruce Wayne's net worth do these eat up anyway? Well, let's start with the first question. Are Batarangs practical weapons? The answer is yes. Long before Gotham's caped crusaders started slinging steel, boomerangs have been a staple in mankind's bag of tricks. While Batman's initial Batarang was based on a specific Australian boomerang, non-returning boomerangs have been used for an estimated 20,000 to 30,000 years. In 1987, scientists discovered the earliest known boomerang in a 23,000-year-old cave in Poland. This 2-foot 4-inch specimen was carved from a woolly mammoth's tusk. While that was revolutionary back then, it's probably a bit too cumbersome to use in Gotham City every night. Besides, how do Batarangs return to the thrower anyway? Well, it's through a process known as Gyroscopic Procession. Basically, Batarangs and boomerangs are akin to propellers. Built in the shape of airfoils, like an airplane's wing, boomerangs are essentially flat at one end and curved at the other end, and one edge is thicker than the other. When a boomerang is thrown, a top wing moves faster through the air compared to the bottom wing. Because the top wing is moving in the direction of the throw, while the bottom wing moves in the opposite direction, the top generates more lift than the bottom wing as a result. When you apply force to a spinning disc, like a boomerang becomes when in full flight, the effect of the force is felt 90 degrees in the direction of the rotation of the disc. So if built properly and allowed to follow its natural tendencies, theoretically the boomerang should return to the point from which it was thrown. Holy aerodynamics, Batman! But as we've seen time and time again, Batman doesn't always wait for his Batarangs to come back to him. As the Batarang has evolved, it has become less of a boomerang in design and more akin to a throwing knife, a tool that has been used for more than 2 million years, making boomerangs look like Robin the Boy Wonder in comparison. Now, whether you classify them as non-returning boomerangs or throwing knives, the physics is largely the same. They follow a long, arcing trajectory, which begins with the arc of the thrower's arm and shoulder. A revolving object that suddenly breaks free will continue to move in a straight line tangential to the point in which it was released. So the ideal point at which Batman should unleash his Batarangs is actually much earlier than you might expect. At the top of the arc, not at his arm's full extension. And despite Batman's general beefcakiness, it isn't about how hard you throw a bladed weapon. Rather, it's about the spin of the blade. The distance a throwing knife travels in a single rotation depends on both the length of the knife and how quickly it spins. For instance, longer knives and throwing axes tend to travel further in a single rotation because their center of gravity is further away from the hand, making the radius of the circular throwing movement bigger. However, talented knife and/or batarang throwers can throw even further by slowing the rotation of the blade. Gripping it more towards the middle delays the time at which the full blade leaves one's hand. At short distances, the key to avoid bounce back is to throw knives as softly as possible, which probably isn't ideal for stopping crime. Then again, softness is relative, because expertly thrown knives average in speed between 26 and 30 miles per hour. While we know that Batman is extremely adverse to murder, he seems to care less about where he leaves his toys in Gotham City. Most of his batarangs seemingly wind up left behind at crime scenes. Some say it's his calling card. I say that he's just used to having his butler Alfred clean up after him. But how expensive is Batman's batarang habit anyway? Well, according to a 2012 report from Money Supermarket, based on the technology seen in the Dark Knight trilogy, Batman's throwing star-esque batarangs are estimated to cost $1,000 for a set of 3. For the sake of simplicity, let's just assume that Batman uses one set of 3 batarangs every night he goes on patrol and doesn't retrieve any of them. If Batman goes on patrol every single night of the year, he goes through 1,095 batarangs and spends $365,000 per year just on these disposable tools. Even if he retrieves his batarangs 50% of the time, he is still spending approximately $180,000 on batarangs alone. Then again, considering that Bruce Wayne is a billionaire and probably has easy access to a steady supply of weapons-grade metals and alloys, I'm sure he's found a way to get himself paid for the very act of producing batarangs in the first place. Besides, considering that Bruce Wayne has approximately 0 hobbies apart from obsessively fighting crime, it's probably an expense that he is A-okay with. And as we've seen throughout the majority of human history, batarangs, in all their variants, are ideal ranged weapons, even if the biggest dent they'll make is in your checkbook. Thanks for watching Behind the Fandom, and I'll see you next time.